Hi, everyone. Welcome to Long Game, a Heated Rivalry podcast. My name is Silvan, and I'm joined with Declan. And so we have Lizzy from the Shelf of Web podcast back again. Hi, Lizzy.
Hello, so happy to be here.
We're so happy to have you back. Now, this is part 2 of the Masculinity in Sport episode that we did last week. So if you haven't listened to that, go back, listen to it, but come back and listen to part 2 because Lizzy's going to give us loads more insight into the world that she works in. So in part 1, we talked mainly about sort of how sport shapes masculinity and, things like what gets rewarded, what gets shut down, and how athletes learn to suppress sort of emotions in order to perform. And for me, what really stood out was this idea that these men don't really have a role model for how to feel things, only mainly just how to perform. And so in part 2, what we're going to do is we're going to explore this deeper, and we're going to explore about what actually this does to them. And one thing that's always fascinated me, specifically with Ilya and Shane, is that they can almost be physically very close, like really, really close, as we've seen, but emotionally distant. And there's this huge distance, especially sort of earlier on. So my question is, why does it feel easier for them to be physically with each other than to actually say how they feel?
I think the easy way to explain that is that it's just being physical is so much more familiar to them. I think athletes from a very young age, particularly male athletes, are not only encouraged to be physical, but they like feed into growing that nature to be physical and be more aggressive with each other and just through sports in general. And I think that can be, I don't want to say damaging, because it's good. It's good to fuel somebody's passion. If a kid likes something, if a kid like really enjoys something, like you want to fuel that passion. But I run into a lot of parents as a coach that have very much have the boys will be boys mentality, which I feel like can be very detrimental to them growing up, and to just how they view themselves in the world and how they should interact with other people. And so for Shane and Ilya, I think sports obviously have been a very big part of their life, and they participate in a very physically demanding sport, and one that is a contact sport, which I think has a lot to do with it as well. And so that's just, they're used to expressing their emotions and feelings through their body and their body's capabilities. And so I think that that is what comes most naturally to them. And I don't think that's like inherently a bad thing whatsoever, but I think in the same way that they've utilized sports to develop how they use their bodies to interact with the world, you also need a counterpart, which is we need somebody to be developing their emotional awareness and how to process those, so that they don't just know how to process their emotions through what they're doing with their bodies. So I feel like the last time we talked, it came off as I was like, I know I can come off very harsh on like the sports world. I love sports. I've grown up in them. I have such appreciation for them. I think that they can provide so many things that people need growing up that you can get from other places, but sometimes they come in the form of a sport. And so I don't want it to come off like I'm like a sports hater. I'm a coach. I love sports, but I just think that it's a very slippery slope that like if we're putting all this time and effort into developing these athletes in very specific areas for their sports, we can't be neglecting their minds and their mental health as well. And so I think that's what often happens with professional athletes is their body and their physical capacity is the commodity, and their minds are kind of they're not thought of essentially. And there's been a lot of research that like, and I think it's very apparent in specific sports that like the mind-body connection is very important. And if your mind is not right, you're not performing well. And so I think I think that we have to work on developing emotional awareness as well as like physical awareness.
Yeah, you can sort of see as well, like you were saying, there's like a mental aspect to doing like competitive sport as well that is so important. And it comes up a lot in sort of hockey in the real world, but a lot in sort of hockey books as well, where there's a big emphasis on this idea of like, we're having a bad run, we're getting into our heads, like, oh my God, this superstitious thing has happened to me, and now all of a sudden everything's going wrong. And you can sort of see it with Scott, like he sees the smoothie or a kip as like good luck charm, which is purely just him mentally psyching himself up in a sense. So there's definitely an interconnection there between the physical and the mental, but in terms of actual like emotional intelligence, it seems to get a little lost in the sauce. And the only emotions that are really sort of nurtured in a sense are that sort of competitive streak, the real intense drive, and the push to be physical, and then those other aspects that are so important to develop, to become like fully rounded people, they're sort of just left to the side for hopefully someone else in their life to step in and help with. And unfortunately, a lot of guys, whenever they go into these sort of very competitive ended sports, they'll find that, you know, there isn't really room or breathing space to sort of take away from the sport you're doing. Like the commitment to the sport sort of overrides everything. Whether that be, you know, developing relationships or personal development, in ways that are really important, especially if you're young, and that's how you're going to get into a competitive sport. You're going to do it from a very young age up until the point where you actually enter it, usually in your teens. So yeah, there seems to be like a mechanism here of development that's lost, that they're kind of going to need to start including, because some of these guys go into the world with a false sense of themselves and their importance and what they can and can't do. And I think that's where you get so many of these scandals and really irrational, stupid events happening that end up splashed on newspapers and tabloids, where they behaved in a really bizarre way. And I think it's just because of that lack of reality sort of being shown to them. Now, I'm talking about like people at a very high level, but I think you can see it as well. People that had a big deal made out of them whenever they were playing sports in school or in college or wherever, and then they go out into the reality, and it's just not. It's not the same. Their behavior isn't as appropriate, and they're not going to get off with as much. They're not as important. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's important to remember that all the professional athletes, the big names, they were like 12-year-old. They were all 12-year-olds at one point, and they were all learning this behavior from someone. I think the whole I don't want to like lump mental health counseling for athletes into like emotional intelligence counseling, but I think athletics as a whole have started, and like as I'm going through my master's, we're being taught about how to mentally prepare our athletes and how to teach them to walk through emotions and process them in an appropriate way and find a solution to fix whatever they're feeling. And I think that mentality and that coaching, I know a lot of like really big teams have an entire team of mental performance coaches and counselors, which is great. And I think we're like moving in the right direction. I think at the time when these books came out, I think in like the early 2000s, this was like not really on the radar at all very much. That was like peak, like athletes are like their bodies and not their minds mentality. I think now we're very much getting into, like I said, we're going in the right direction, but I think a lot of that is in part to specific athletes like being vulnerable, similar to what Scott does, and saying, I am this athlete and this is what I'm capable of, but I also need help. Like I need help with this if I'm going to be able to continue to do this. And we talked about Kevin Love last time. He's great. Simone Biles is also a great representation of it as well, because she took off time for mental health, and I think she caught some backlash initially, but I think the majority of it was like so supportive. And it's like, if she like you would think that like she's one of the best athletes that has like ever lived on this planet. If she needs help, don't we think that other people who don't have, and this is a convoluted way of saying it, but like Simone has all the resources in the world, NBA athletes have all the resources in the world. They have all the coaches and all the counselors and all the people around them. They have access to the money to fund all of this stuff that they need. High school and grade school kids do not have that, especially if you're like, I grew up in a small town and we had one athletic trainer and one coach, and like we did not have any support staff, and I didn't experience support staff until I got to college. And so like younger athletes a lot of times do not have access to that. And so I hope we're moving towards a world where they do have access to that, but I also hope we're moving towards a world where there are enough people that are aware of its importance that coaches and trainers can take on some of that burden as well. And help like stigmatize vulnerability and emotion in sport, and help destigmatize it. So, but yeah.
Yeah, and as you were saying that, I was wondering whose responsibility is that? Is the responsibility on having, a sports psychologist, for example, on, a faculty, or is it the responsibility of coaches to then take on further training in psychology and psychological fields? Like, where does that lie?
I think it depends on the staff that you have. My experience with this was my college coach. He was the head coach of our track and field team, but he was also the throws coach. So he was also our individual coach. And he specifically went out and got his master's in strength and conditioning so that he could coach us in the weight room. And so coaches do that. If like that's something that I'm probably going to end up doing as well, is I'm going to end up getting certified in mental performance coaching or something like that. And I think if you have the existing coaches that are open to do that and want to do that, you should absolutely give them the opportunity to do that and help be that support staff. But if they don't want to do that, you need to have some sort of pathway set up for athletes to be able to get counseling. And so I know for like a lot of smaller schools, it's not feasible to have somebody on staff full time, but even just like a referral program or just like even just like a sheet of like, this is where you can go and this is who you can call. And like, we will help you make these appointments and like, we'll go with you if you don't want to go by yourself. And I think it's done on a very case by case basis. I think every athlete's needs are going to be totally different. I think for like more significant cases, you absolutely need to be going to like a sports psychologist that has gone to schooling for a long time and has been trained to do this. But I think for like triaging stuff, like little stuff here and there, I think as many people as you can get on staff that have like the basic knowledge for like, this is how we should be helping them develop. I think that's key. And then if something goes awry after that, then that's when we bring in the like additional faculty and staff. But I think it just kind of depends on what staff you have and like what they are interested in doing and if they have a passion for that. Yeah.
And so thinking of, the Shanes, the Ilyas, the Scotts, and all the resources they have, how much of a difference do you think it would make to them to have that psychological support? Because the show we only got 6 episodes, and the book, from what I've read so far, doesn't really cover the psychological aspects of the sport. How much of that would have been a factor in real life, for example?
Like how much do you think it would have helped if they had access to that, or if they had like actively gone?
Yeah, I suppose both in a way. Like, would they have had access to it? And how much would it have helped their performance if they did?
So I think if you're looking at the time period, and I don't know, I was younger then, and I was not very familiar with what was going on, but I would think that players in the NHL, which is like our actual equivalent to it, they absolutely would have had access to it. Would it have been like frontline treatment? Would people have been encouraging them to go as much? I don't know. I don't think so. But if they had the thought themselves, I feel like I need to go to some sort of counseling or therapy, I'm struggling mentally, they absolutely would have had not only the funds, but the support system to get them there. But I think what people don't real and something you don't realize, but it's just going to therapy and getting things out of it, I feel like is twofold. It's going, but it's also like being present there and wanting to get better and accepting that that's what you need to be doing, which I think for a lot of, I think Scott, Ilya, Shane, I think all of them would have issues going. They go to therapy because somebody's like, you need to go to therapy. And I think all of them have the gut reaction of, I'm fine the way I am. I don't need to, like, I've got what works for me. I'm not sick. Like, I don't need help. And so I think they struggle with that as well. And so that, I think, draws into, it's not enough to just have the people there. It's not enough to just have the professionals there to talk with them about these things, but it's setting up an environment in which those athletes feel like it's okay to assess themselves internally, much in the same way they assess themselves before every practice, before every game, as they're warming up. They're doing their warm-ups, they're feeling what their body, like, they're closing their eyes, they're feeling what their body's feeling, they're feeling for like tweaks and small pains and stuff like that. It's setting up an environment to let athletes do that mentally and like take a moment and be quiet and say, is there something that I'm worried about? Is there something that's adding stress to what I'm doing right now? Is there an easy, and a lot of this stuff can be, if you just give them like the good habits to begin with, it doesn't ever escalate beyond that. Like, if you just teach them how to, like, okay, I'm panicking about this, but like, what's the end goal? And like, what's the easiest way to get through that? Like, let's not panic and freak out. Let's like logically think through what's the next best step. And so I think that that's half the battle, is like getting the athletes to be able to realize themselves that they need help. And like, that's not anything new. Like, that's the same thing with like addiction, is like the first step to treatment is making the person realize that they need help and they have an issue. And so I think I think they would have absolutely had access to it. Whether or not they would have taken advantage of it, it's hard, especially in that. And I think you see for Ilya, like, Ilya takes a step with Shane because he sees Scott do it. Again, like, you see the importance of role models and how once one person does it, it becomes easier to do it. And so I think if they have somebody at that time that does it, if they have a teammate that's like, yeah, if Hayden goes up to Shane and it's like, yeah, Jackie and I have been going to like couples therapy and it's been really helping. Shane's like, oh, that's another opportunity for me to up my game. And he goes, right? It's just like, they're never going to be the first people to do it, but they would if it was like a little less scary for them.
I would love to see Shane and Ilya in couples therapy with Olga. I don't know if you've ever seen the TV show. I think it would be peak TV.
Oh, yeah. It would be so good.
Love it. And actually, Declan, what you were talking about earlier as well was you were talking about sort of Scott, and, you know, when he's with Kip, he's on this, he's happy and he's winning these games and things like that. And it made me think, like, do these athletes, one, perform better if they're happy or if they're angry? Because we see in the Game Changer book, because I finished it finally, because we have a book club now, we see in the Game Changer book that when Kip and Scott are, and I'm going to use inverted commas if you can't see me, broken up, because Lord, there's been like a whole discourse about this on our socials, which I'm loving. But when you see that they've broken up, Scott is preoccupied with this, what's going on, and he doesn't play as well. And, so I don't know. What are your thoughts, Declan? Because you've read all the books.
Well, I don't think anger is a sustainable emotion. I think anger costs too much to keep going. I don't know if you've ever had that experience where you have been so angry and you're in an argument with someone, and you've had the argument and afterwards you just feel wrung out. You feel like just like a wet rag on the floor. So I imagine in, like, for maybe a couple of games, anger will probably carry a player through to a certain point, but then the burnout will have straight away. Like, there is an emotional burnout there. And I like the idea that they are playing better because they're working on their own personal lives and they're working on their own happiness, and that it's a result of them not having to worry about any other aspect of their life because it feels complete. And that allows
Mhm.
them to focus solely on hockey. So I do like that idea, I like the element of it. And I think it's kind of what happens with Scott. I think that's kind of how Scott's story goes. And the minute that
Mhm.
he stops performing well, I don't think it's because Kip's a good luck charm. I think it's because Kip makes him happy. And a happy Scott is someone who plays better. Because before he meets
Mhm.
um, Kip, he's not happy. He's kind of miserable in terms of how he feels he's playing and how he feels he's being spoken about in the media and his general sort of social life. He wants more, and whenever he finally has it, all of a sudden he can play to the best of his ability. So it's a nice sort of setup for how the relationship between Scott and Kip impacts his playing. Um,
Mhm.
and yeah, it's really it's satisfying as well. It makes you feel that, oh, love fixes everything. It cures all. It's amazing.
Maybe just some good dick helps too.
Could just be that as well. Yeah, you're not wrong, Sylvan.
I think there's a little bit of like a physiological connection here. So there's it's not a concept, it's a thing that happens. So like I tell my athletes a lot when they're really struggling with something and I feel like they're focusing really hard and trying to do everything correctly, they end up it's worse. They somehow fuck it up more. And so I tell them a lot, I'm like, stop trying so hard. Stop trying so hard because once you've done something over and over and over again, you develop the muscle memory for it. And at on a competition stage, you ideally want to be just operating off of instinct and like letting your muscle memory take over. And that is when you play to the best of your capabilities, when you don't have to cognitively think about what you're doing, your body knows what to do. And so, whenever you're stressed, angry, upset about something, frustrated by something, you sit and try and pick it apart to fix it. And it a lot of times makes it worse. And so, as you're picking it apart, you actually take your brain out of the muscle memory and you revert yourself back to like a beginner's learning capacity for like the physicality, so that there's very much a connection between what is going on up here and how they're playing. So if Scott is feeling good about his relationship with Kip and he just feels more upbeat in general, he's less likely to get frustrated if something doesn't go well. He's more likely to let small mistakes roll off his back and not focus on them. And he's also more likely to just operate off of he's more confident in himself, so he feels confident in his abilities, and he can operate off of instinct instead of we've lost the last 3 games. People are talking shitty about me on the new on pot like on social media, and I have to do really well to combat this. And like that mentality, it spirals you, and then you play worse and worse and worse because you're thinking so hard about it. When in reality, you genuinely just need to let it go. So there's a very real connection between what thoughts you're having and what your body is physically even capable of. So I think that's where like choking comes from too. Is like athletes get so nervous and they're like going through each piece of the motion that they're trying to complete in individual steps when at this point they've done it so many times, they know it, like their body knows it as one motion. It's one big thing. And when you break it up like that, your body's like, okay, I don't know how to do this anymore. So, and then you end up doing something that's like totally crazy. So, like, you see like an NBA player completely airball a free throw, and you're like, how did that happen? They practice free throws all the time. Like, how does that happen? It's because of that. Your body does kooky things when you think about things too hard.
So is that a distraction technique in a way, or is that something completely different?
What do you mean?
So, like, for example, when I'm working with a client who has anxiety
Mm-hmm.
or panic attacks, for example,
Mm-hmm.
and within a cognitive behavioral sort of framework, when they're sort of triggered by something and they're getting panicked and that's escalating, we'll use like a distraction technique to help sort of take them out of that headspace. So
Yeah.
sometimes it could be like snapping a rubber band on your wrist or counting backwards from 103 kind of thing. So is what you're talking about, is that similar to a distraction technique, or would it be very different to that?
It's very similar. It's really just like getting, it's pretty much the exact same thing. It's just getting your mind, because you're spiraling on, you're frustrated about one thing specifically. It's just trying to get your mind off of it. And so typically for me, I completely change up what I'm asking them to do. I ask them to think about something totally different. I'll have them take a lot of times it depends on the athlete. Sometimes like taking a break helps, but sometimes athletes will just go sit and stew on what they've done, and it makes it worse. So again, you just have to know your athletes and like know what is going to most benefit them in that situation. But yeah, what works to get them out of that headspace is also totally different depending on the person. And it is very much a trial and error to figure out what that is. And sometimes athletes come in and they have an idea, or they've like kind of subconsciously known what gets them out of that headspace. Like a couple of them, they love to laugh, and they're really funny. They have a good sense of humor. And so like they default to joking when they get frustrated, which I feel like is a very healthy response. And I encourage it whenever I can, because I would much rather have them laugh off, and not that they're not taking it seriously. They're just not taking themselves too seriously, which I think is important. I would rather have them laugh off or make a joke about a mistake that they made than get pissed about it and not be able to practice because of it. So I think everybody's a little different. I do have one or two that like they get really, really frustrated, and it's very hard to like pull them out of that. A lot of times what ends up happening is if they're throwing hammer, I'm just like, okay, we'll go throw jab. Like, we're going to completely take you away from what you're doing right now because you're not in the headspace, and that's okay, right? Like, we're not trying to like, Rome wasn't built in a day. We're not trying to master this today. You made some good progress. Even if we learned what we shouldn't be focusing on or what you shouldn't do, that's still progress towards what we should do. So I think it's just a method of learning what makes the athletes tick. And I think that is like the key to human interaction in general, is like figuring out what makes the person you're communicating with tick and trying to understand them on an emotional and like internal level, as opposed to just like taking them at face value versus like what they're physically putting off.
Yeah, Declan, what do you think Shane's response to that would be, or even Ilya's? Like, what do you think would snap them out of they're in their head too much?
Shane, I think, is the more difficult one. I think he's the one who spends the most time in his head. Ilya, I don't think he would need much, to be honest. Ilya he sort of snaps himself out of it in a lot of ways. I'm not really sure what sort of specific thing that he does that allows him to do it, but he, whenever put under pressure in terms of like playing the game, like even after losing his father and the disruption of his family and everything that's going on with Ilya, like he goes out and he kicks ass immediately. He uses it almost as like motivation to keep going. It's like he has a point to prove, and he obviously does as well. He has to his father, to his family, to himself, and I think that seems to override the instinct to overthink at all. I think Ilya is more driven to action, and he spends less time strategically thinking and just goes by instinct. I think that's why he's such a good player, because he trusts his body, he trusts his training, he trusts that he can go out there and put his all into it and that it's going to go well for him, because he has this confidence that I am the fucking best at this and no one can tell me otherwise. And I don't know if he just sort of manifests it, but it seems to work. I get the idea that Ilya is good at a lot of things. I think he's the kind of person that would be very good at things the immediate moment he picks it up, just because he has such trust and confidence in himself. Whereas Shane is like the sort of master over fucking decades of experience. Like, he's gone over these things. He's ran it through his head a million times. He's done every scenario.
Mm-hmm.
He has fought his way through the entire match and played it back in his head 10 times. And he seems to take a comfort from that. He doesn't seem to find it quite debilitating. When do we see Shane sort of play badly? We don't really. Shane doesn't really play badly. I think this is because people are just so unique to themselves. Sometimes that level of overthinking and preparation works for you depending on your personality type. If you feel that you know what's going to happen, you have a good idea of what you're walking into, you've pre-planned it in your head, you pre-planned the conversations, the way that the puck's going to drop, the way that you're going to skate, the plans for how you're all going to approach it as the team, and you're able to execute that. Like, there's a comfort in that, and you can have confidence in the fact that you planned well, so that you feel that things are going to go the way that you choose to let them go to, because you've thought about it, you've looked at it from every angle. Whereas if you swapped the two of these guys to use their own approaches, so if you had Shane, I'm throwing you in this match, and all this stuff has happened to you, good luck out there. You're gonna do great, kid. He would probably choke because he's not had the mental preparation. He's out of his routine. Nothing is as it's supposed to go. There's no flow. It's not right for him. And he would do badly. Whereas if you had Ilya then take on Shane's approach, where he has studied and overthought every aspect of the game, there is miles and miles and miles of preparation going on in his head, and then you try to get him to go out and do this plan exactly as he's thought it out, he would probably choke. So I think everyone's approach is unique to them as individuals, and I think Rachel Reed's put that across really well. And whenever she was characterizing the two of them, that they are both at the top of the game, and yet they both have such a different approach to it. And yet they're both basically as talented as one another, even though they can be more different in that sense. And I think that also lends to sort of the relationship as well, that sort of opposites attract thing. But yeah, I would like to see that play out. And it probably does in real life for real people who will all have their own individual approaches that would work for them specifically, but for nobody else.
I feel like I'm listening to myself talk to somebody about this when you're talking, because I say that all the time, that I have like two types of athletes. I have the ones that when I ask them to do something new, they don't think about it, they just do it, that's Ilya. And then I have other athletes who want me to walk through it step by step and explain why and how it's happening and the mechanics of it. And they're totally different. And they're both insanely successful in their own ways. But you're absolutely right. They would be incapacitated if they had to try and adopt each other's routines. But I also think that it's important that that those types of athletes are on the same team together and can learn from each other. So I think as far as what would pull Shane out of, is we see this a lot, is Ilya makes jokes. Like, Ilya's laughing, and it kind of pulls Shane out of his head. And so I think in a lot of ways like that, having somebody that's laughing, and you see this in Shane's teammates as well. Like, Shane's teammates are laughing with him and joking with him. Hayden is the first one to like lean over to him and be like, Captain Hollander, like, what do you, like, he's like mimicking, like holding a mic. Like, they're joking with him because they know him as a person. And so I think in that way, like, he's missing a little bit of the like exhale, and so his teammates are bringing that to him. On the flip side, Ilya is just a terror and is just operates on instinct and vibes only, and I think he could absolutely benefit from a little bit more structure and a little bit more organization and a little bit more preparedness, but just like a little bit in terms of like, we're going to practice a specific way. We're going to practice how we want to play. We're going to practice specific things we want you to be able to naturally do. But then when it's time to be on ice, you just go. And so I think it's important to have, and like, those are like the two big groups of athletes that I see the most frequently, are the ones that I say jump, and they say, there's a group that says, how high do you want me to bend my legs? Do you want me to use my arms? Like that. are you going to measure it? What are you going to measure it for? And then there's the group that just jumps. And they're both like, those are two very important parts of being a successful athlete. And you're stronger in one area than the other, but you need ideally both of them, but not in equal amounts to like be genuinely successful. The most successful you can be is what I kind of want to say.
And in a way, these are coping strategies, right? And so where is that line where this coping strategy, whichever one that it might be, is adaptive versus damaging to your game?
I think Ilya leans more towards, I think the emotions that Ilya immediately gravitates towards are anger most of the time. Anger, frustratedness, like he feels like he needs to prove himself. And I think that very easily can become, I don't even know how I want to say that. I think, Declan, when you said that well isn't very deep, when you have, like, when you're operating off of anger only, I think when you run out of it, I don't know if you know what you're going to do. Like, I feel like you lose a bit of that passion, that spark. And I think when you're in such a heightened state of emotion, when you're being led by anger and frustration, I think you are more spontaneous, but also more irrational just inherently. And so I think you make decisions like that you would not make if you were clear-headed. And sometimes in sports that is a good thing. Sometimes spontaneity, not letting the other team know what you're going to do next is great. I think because it also allows you to move more quickly. But I also think if you're on a team with other players and there are other players on the ice, you have to, on some level, be aware of where they're at and like be thinking, this is where they are now, this is where they're going to be, this is where I need to be. And I think when you get to a certain point of like emotional, like heightened emotions when you're playing like that, I think you kind of lose track of that. And I think we see that a couple times where we hear about it, where the announcers say that Ilya has done everything. Like, he's gotten to a point where he doesn't trust his teammates to help him through this, and he takes it upon himself to do everything. So I think that is the detriment of how he plays, is he takes it all upon himself. I have a hard time speaking on Shane's because I am more like Shane as an athlete. So
that's really interesting. So there's something that you can speak to for Shane in a way. And I was just thinking about sort of like hockey in general, ice hockey in general. There's a lot of aggression in the sport, and as a spectator, there's a thrill in watching that, and it almost feels like that kind of behavior. I know, like on socials, they call it the boy aquarium, but people get off and enjoy these players literally hitting each other. So it feels very Roman Empire gladiator-esque, just a bit more gayer and on ice. Well, Gladiator was pretty gay anyway. But regardless, this aggression, overt aggression is rewarded because spectators like to enjoy watching it. So how does that then sort of feed into what the players are being expected? Because it feels like a performance in a way.
Yeah, I think you go from being a young athlete who's being told by their coaches and their close friends and close families to feed into your aggressive nature and the physicality. And then you get into a high school setting and you experience the same thing. And then you get into a professional setting where you have thousands of spectators that are banging on the glass, encouraging you to get into a fight with somebody. And you know that is what sells tickets, that's what drives engagement. Like, that's what's expected of you. So I had always kind of wondered, like, I kind of want to, I've never spoken to like a professional hockey player. I don't think. No, I haven't. And I want to ask them, like, how much of the beef that you guys have on ice and off ice is genuine, and how much of it are you like fanning the flames so that somebody gets into a fight and like it's a more enjoyable experience for the fans? Like, how much of that is your natural capacity for being competitive and being ready for a fight, and how much of it is put on for a show? I have no idea. I hope to God all those men are not that brimming with anger all the time. That would terrify me.
That would be scary.
That would terrify me.
Mm. And Rachel Reed actually dedicates one of the Game Changers books to this idea of the sort of fighting that happens in hockey, like the appropriateness of it. Do the players actually like it? Like, how do they feel in general about, you know, sort of the spectators' violence that goes on? Because obviously hockey isn't the only sport where people fight. Like, you have MMA, you have boxing, like all those have become very, very popular, and they're huge, and people turn out in their tens of thousands to see sort of matches like this. But I suppose it could just go down to a sort of deeper instinct of ours to want to enjoy violence. I mean, look at TV shows, books, films, like even like you said, like going back to the Roman Colosseum, like there is something within people that enjoys violence to a certain extent, enjoys watching it, maybe not so much inflicting it and having it inflicted upon them, but I don't know, maybe the thrill of watching someone fight to see who comes out on top, the competition of it all. I suppose that's what sports is all about. It's about wanting to see who wins whenever you put two people together. So with hockey in particular, I thought it was odd when I first watched ice hockey, the idea that they're fighting. Like, because I got, obviously in the UK, like we grew up and we watch football, and if you fight on a football pitch, you basically cannot at all play for probably the rest of the season if you're getting into a fight. Like, you are basically a useless player at that point, and they have just paid millions and millions of pounds to have you sit on a bench. Like, it just isn't done. And rugby as well. Like, rugby is a much more physical sport. It's a proper contact sport. Like, it's American football without the padding. It's really, really intense and really aggressive. And yet, I've never really seen players fight on the pitch. Like, there's like a camaraderie to it. There's like a friendliness. It's such a different way of approaching it. So I don't know what it is about hockey specifically. I don't know where the tradition of fighting came from. But yeah, it has me curious anyway.
I don't know. God, I hate to say that, like, I feel like American culture is like that's why that exists, but you know, okay, so it's cathartic, like that's why people like fighting and being aggressive, because it feels like release. But you know from watching other contact sports that it can be done without physically fighting each other, right? And there is something very cathartic about doing anything that's very like taxing on your body. Like weightlifting is very cathartic for me. And so like we can do it. We just are choosing not to. We're choosing to lean into, we like watching men genuinely just punch each other in the face. And I think that in and of itself is a huge contributor to how athletes are brought up in the US. But I don't know if anything, like it's so hard to change the mentality of sports in the US because of how successful we are. Because of how successful we are at the Olympics, because of how successful we are in like a national state, like on a world stage. Like they're not gonna change, like all these coaches, they're not gonna change it because like it's led to athletes who are the best in the world. And so it's going to be really hard to change that mentality of, and I'm trying to think of like a good example, but I don't know.
And in a way, you know, doing things the way they've been done has led to some success, right? Or a lot of success in most cases. And I was thinking on a systemic level, yes, you can see that, but also there's lots of internal processes that are facilitating that actually are quite damaging in a way. And I was thinking back to Scott's speech. I think it's the top of episode 6, and he alludes to the homophobia in in hockey or in the sport that he plays, right? And
Mm-hmm.
there is this sort of fear that he talks about being called the names in the locker room and things like that, and
Mm-hmm.
which then facilitates him to not be open or as open as he wanted to be.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just thinking, like, what does that do to a person in terms of being emotionally open in a sport? Or, does that make them appear soft or vulnerable? Or, is that quite damaging in a sporting environment?
Just like being an athlete who wants to have their feelings considered.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's going to be different on every team. I think it's going to be different depending on what the coach promotes. There are a lot of coaches who don't like talk of emotion and any vulnerability, and I think especially when you're looking at team sports, like the whole "you're only as strong as the weakest link" comes into is impactful there. And there's the whole emotional vulnerability is weakness, and so like you can't show any of that. And so I think it really depends on what the coach is promoting. I think individual sports, I think that there is more of an emphasis on not an emphasis, but I think it's more accepting to be emotionally vulnerable, because in being vulnerable and being weak, you're only letting down yourself at that point, right? So like you're as strong as you want to be, whereas in a team environment like hockey, you are as strong, like the team is as strong as you are. So if you're being weak, the team is therefore weak. And so I think I think being in a team environment is so incredibly, I think learning how to work well in a team is such an important life skill in general. And again, you can learn how to work in a team from so many different areas. Athletics is how I learned how to do it. But there's, in all the good that you learn in working together as a team, you also learn that the best way to work together as a team is to have one set of values, is to all feel and think the same thing at the same time. Like that is like the peak of being a team, is to trust your teammates and understand that they are thinking what you're thinking. And so if you have a coach or a captain who has damaging feelings towards being vulnerable and properly processing your emotions, then that, as a result, like the whole team has to feel like that, and the whole team has to buy into that. And if you don't buy into it, you're not a team player, and like you're ostracized for it. And like I've seen that happen before. Like as I was growing up, like even in like grade school, like we had a pretty good girls basketball team. We went to like state competitions, and which is not normal for like a small school that we were. And so I think a lot of girls who are on my team were there just to play the sport, not necessarily to like win state or like be the best, but just to be active and to spend time with their friends and learn how to work together in a team. But there were very obviously some who didn't take it as seriously, or who were bringing non-sports mentalities into sports. And it was not received well by the coaches. It was not received well by the athletes who took it more seriously. And like, I had to unlearn that. Like, I was one of those girls that was like, I want to fucking win. I don't know what you're doing out in the field picking daisies, but I want to fucking win. And then I had to like unlearn that, because I'm like, we're in like 7th grade. Like this is not do or die right now. Yeah.
But why? Why did you have to unlearn that? I don't know how old you are in 7th grade. I'm assuming preteen?
8th grade. Okay, so like when you get into high school, you're like 14. So like 8th grade would have been like 13, 14, and then 7th grade would have been 12, 13.
Yeah. So why should you have to unlearn that? Because some kids are naturally more competitive than others.
Yeah.
And I was that child, similar to you. Yeah. I wanted to win. I'm not a sore loser, but if we're going to do something, we're going to do it well, and we're going to win. Otherwise, what's the point?
Yeah. So I think a lot of it, I think a lot of it is the context. I think, and you know what? My sister is a great example. She, 9 years older than me, was never uber into sports. And so she had a really like different outlook on it than I did. And I think it also comes down to is like, what's more important, you winning a game or the well-being of other human beings?
It would say or, I pick or, but I don't. I pick the
Yeah.
first one.
So, and you get to a certain point where, like, when you're at the professional level, you don't get to make that decision on your own. Like, that decision is made for you. It's winning the game. Like, that's what's most important.
Mm-hmm.
But, like, when you're not being paid to do it, when you're doing it for the love and the joy of the game, you have to think, like, I'm competitive. I'm not going to not be competitive, but I need to expect my teammates to show up to practice, to give effort, to have a good attitude. And outside of that, like, whatever they've got going on inside their head is, one, not my business, and two, not my circus, not my monkeys. Like, if they have other stuff going on, I cannot let that impact how I feel, and I can't take it out on them because, like, they're a different person than I am. And just because I'm here for this goal doesn't mean they have to be here for this goal as well. So I think it's context. I think, and that's going to come across as me being like anti-competitiveness. Not the case. There's a time and place for competitiveness. 7th grade basketball was not the time or the place. I think once you get into high school, specifically if you go to, like, in the US, specific high schools are more well known for sports and they're more well equipped to handle athletes that kind of prepare you for college sports. I think sometimes you get into a different mindset there. And then you also have JV versus varsity teams in high school. So that is also the intersection of people who take it, maybe, I think also in high school, if you don't take the sport seriously, you don't play it. Which is, I think, I don't know if that's the same in other places, but, like, high school is like the cutoff is, like, if you don't want to be there for the betterment of the sport, you don't play it in high school. If you want to play sports, you do intramurals. But if you don't want to be competitive, then you don't play in high school. And then you have JV and varsity teams. And so I think as you get older, as you're more, like, intellectually aware of what's going on, and as your frontal lobe has developed a little bit more and you can make better decisions, I think it's okay to be given that option of being competitive. But I think when you're so young, like, I think it is very detrimental.
See, I'm going to get on my soapbox here because I was that competitive child, and I think it's okay to be able to harness that in a child if they, develop in that way. Of course, you don't force it on them, because then what do we teach kids? We teach kids, yes, it's, for the love of the game and it's the journey. Yes, absolutely. But why can't it be about winning? Because life isn't about the journey. Let's be honest, and for some people, that's when they're going to start honing in on their craft. That's where they're going to learn, I'm really good at playing this position in volleyball, for example. This is the position I'm going to go in and play in high school and then in college, for example. Like, I think we, as a society, I know I'm going on a bit of a rant here, but as a society, we try and sort of diffuse it so it's more palatable for everyone. And it's not. Let's just let people work hard at what they want to work hard at. Honestly, like, let kids be kids, but let the kids who are good at something be good at it, because naturally some kids were naturally either very academic in my school or very sporty. And it wasn't fair that the children who were really naturally sporty then felt that they couldn't compete academically. So if you're good at playing football, get the awards, win everything. I don't care. It doesn't take anything away from me. But if I want an A at my English literature exam paper, then I'm definitely going to get that too.
I think that's super important. And as I was talking, I don't want it to come across as like it shouldn't be about winning. If you want it to be about winning, it should be about winning. But I think when you're younger, I think it's important to take into account that it's not about winning for everybody. And, like, you can't make them want it to be about winning, right? Like, you can bust your ass, and you should. If you're passionate about it, you can bust your ass at practice and get better, and you can drag your, like, less talented teammates behind you up a hill, and that's fine, and you will be a better athlete for it. But I was just trying to get at, like, we shouldn't shame the kids who are not naturally competitive because they get, like, scared. They get scared of sports and they don't do it anymore.
Kick them out.
I have like the complete opposite. I am in no way, well, I'm not competitive less. Like I am competitive in certain ways, but like I never had like a strong inkling to be the smartest or to be the fastest or the sort of best at sports because I always felt that I wasn't. Like I wasn't sort of built to be like that. Like I wasn't built. I definitely was not built to be the best at any sport. Like I was very small, very skinny for most of my life, and no matter what I would have done, I would never have been the best at it. So at that point, it just sort of had to come to an acceptance of like I can do certain things, but I can't do this really. I'm never going to be the best at this, and I'm not really enjoying losing all the time. So I'm just sort of taking a step back from that because I don't feel like I'm getting anything out of it. So
Mm-hmm.
if you are someone that is hyper competitive though, and you have the advantages of being very good at the thing that you're in competition with, then yeah, go for it. Obviously, I mean, we all each have our own unique gifts. You should definitely play to
Mm-hmm.
your advantages because everyone else will. So do that. So if you want to be hyper competitive, you want to get that A in English, if you want to be the top of your class in English, then by all means go for it. You try to kick everyone's ass, you do it. Good motivation. But also know your limits in other areas as well. When if you pour competitiveness into something that is not futile, but is going to end up making you feel worse in the long run when you're pouring too much energy into it and you're not getting returns, then that's the time to sort of be like, maybe it's time to let this go, let it simmer down a bit, because everyone has their own talents.
Yeah.
Sometimes the thing that you're focusing on isn't what you're meant to be doing.
Yes. And what if little Declan had a coach who was coaching him to be better at the running, the whatever sport it was? How much of a difference would that have made to little Declan? Because Lizzy was talking about role models in part one. What if you had that role model that was championing you, even if you were the tiny, skinny little kid, but you could run really fast?
I mean, I did. She was the Garrett's PE teacher, and she took us to have Starbucks instead because I was bad at all the boy sports.
Oh, I love that for her.
Yeah, I mean, listen, you can't make up for the loss of like being 5'4" when you're 16. It's just not gonna, it's not gonna help you with sport or running much. But um, the people within our school were quite, they like to push people towards sport because it's good for you. So it is, it's good for your health and it's good for your physical well-being and
Mm-hmm.
your mental well-being as well. So I do encourage people to do sports, even if you don't think you're going to win. You know, it's not all about winning. Sometimes the health and the fitness and the just benefits of the general doing of it alone is worth it.
Mm-hmm.
But when it does get to competition, and you are working in a team, I think you need to bring as much of yourself as you possibly can to be fair. Now, I wouldn't say that to a 13-year-old. I would say it maybe to a 15, 16-year-old and upwards,
Mm-hmm.
that if you are
Yeah.
going to commit to this, this is optional. No one's forcing you to be here. But if you are going to commit to this, then you need to bring your 100% because
Mm-hmm.
everyone else in this team is, and it's only fair that you do the same.
Yeah. And there are definitely coaches who lead with that. Like high school coaches in the US, a lot of them will be like, if you don't want to be here, there's the door. Like points to the gym door. And I think it goes back to what we were talking about of like successful teams all need to have the same mentality.
Mhm.
And I think as you get older and the opportunities for participating in different sports increase and like the different like you have competitive sports and you have JV and you have varsity and you have intramural and you have all these different areas, you need to go towards the sport that the team matches your mentality. I think that's the most important thing.
I agree. I'm backtracking a little. I agree that, yes, there is a time and place to push a sport, but maybe there's an age in which that feels a bit forced. So, allowing them to develop at their own rate and in their own time span, because I was given that opportunity and I tried out lots of different sports throughout when I was growing up, and I did literally every sport until I found the few that I was happy with and good at, because that makes a difference, like Declan was saying.
Mm.
And I suppose all these hockey players, Shane and Ilya and Scott, they all have that same mentality and that shared value that you were talking about.
I think that's us for this episode, though. If you guys enjoyed this, obviously follow Lizzy on her socials as well. We had a really great time with this discussion. We had to split it into two parts because there's just so much to discuss. But we've had a really, really fun one with this one, and hopefully we'll have them back soon with Ren. But guys, like, subscribe, share this. If you are interested in seeing more of this, me and Silvan also have a book club, Free Fable. It's the Long Game Podcast Book Club. At the minute, we are just finishing up with Tough Guy by Rachel Reed. We're making our way through the Game Changer series. And also on the podcast, I think for this next episode, me and Silvan will be getting into Heated Rivalry, the book, the first half of it, and we'll be having that discussion then. So if that sounds good to you, or if you're interested in any of that, then give us a shout, and we'll see you all next time.